So on the first day of school, when a teacher is getting to know the class, one of the first things a teacher should say is, who here is afraid of making a mistake? And the very first hand that goes up should be the teacher's.
Welcome back to Innovating Education, the podcast where we explore groundbreaking ideas and strategies that are transforming the way we teach and learn. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and today we have a truly inspiring guest, Dr. Stephen Barron, a New York State licensed psychologist, nationally certified school psychologist, and the author of Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach: How to Motivate Students and Build Relationships. With over 30 years of experience as a school psychologist, Dr. Barron has worked extensively with children, adolescents, and their families, focusing on a strength-based approach that helps students harness their innate capabilities rather than focusing on deficits. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the principles of strength-based teaching, how it impacts student engagement, and how educators can use these strengths to create more motivated and resilient learners. Dr. Barron, welcome to Innovating Education.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Well, before we get into your book and the strength-based approach, I'd love to hear about your journey. What led you to pursue a career in psychology and education?
Well, that's a good question. Originally, I wanted to be, when I was younger, I remember wanting to be a sports journalist. I wanted to be the next Howard Cosell. For those of you who know who Howard Cosell was, he was a famous announcer. I wanted to be a journalist, an announcer, a reporter. And I started taking journalism classes in college, and I realized it's a lot of work, and it's a very hard field to break into back then. So then I thought, well, maybe accounting. My dad was an accountant. I took accounting, but it wasn't for me. I wasn't really, didn't grab me. Then I took a psychology class, and I was really motivated by this professor. And he just seemed to, present the material in a fascinating way. And I thought, you know what, this is something I'd like to know more about. So I took more psychology, and I was hooked within a year. And I decided I wanted to work in a setting where I did internships in different places working with kids. And I decided I wanted to do something where I could be helpful to children. So that led me to work in a school setting, and which I did for 30 years. And I retired 3 years ago from that. And it was just a great opportunity to try to impact kids in a very meaningful and important way. And I enjoyed it.
Dr. Barron, your work centers around the strength-based approach to education. For those who may not be familiar, can you give us a brief overview of what this model entails and why it's so important?
Well, one of the things I noticed when I started working in the schools was, especially in the area of special education, where I worked a lot, there was a tendency to look at what don't kids do well, what do kids struggle with. And, when we would design IEPs, individual education plans for children, there'll be a lot of information on it, what the kids can't do, not so much what they could do. And over time, focusing on weaknesses and areas of challenge for children, it becomes kind of demoralizing, I think, for the kids as well as their parents, and honestly, the staff that works with them. So I was feeling restless with that, and with that whole way of thinking about children. And I think the turning point for me was I was able to go to a conference given by a psychologist named Dr. Robert Brooks, who has written a lot about resiliency in children. And I just felt he was talking to me. I really felt that, looking at identifying assets of kids, seeing, how to bring out the best in children, and believing that all children have some signature strengths. Maybe we don't know it. Maybe we don't see it. It may be hidden, but it's there. And I think that's a very important message to give to kids and their families as well. So I began to incorporate that philosophy in my work in the school. And also I've been in private practice, I still am. And I've taken this positive psychology, strength-based approach to work with the kids that I see. And basically the premise behind it is to help children identify what their buried treasures are. Where are they within themselves, and how can they access them? And I think that's a very important gift to give to a child. It's a legacy that will hopefully stay with them for a very long time. And that led me to write my book, Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach. I tried a lot of things in schools over the year. I observed not using a strength-based approach. And so my purpose in writing it was to develop like a workbook or source book for educators and how to bring this way of thinking and how to practically apply some of the philosophy of it, with children in the classroom and try to bring out the best in kids.
What does the research say about the effectiveness of a strength based approach compared to traditional methods? And are there key studies or findings that reinforce this impact?
Yeah, intuitively, it makes a lot of sense what I'm saying. But that's a good question you ask. Where's the data? Where's the hard evidence? And there is a lot of hard evidence to support it. There have been many studies using a strength-based approach in education. And we find that it does enhance student engagement, student satisfaction, student success academically. And I think it's not just a strength-based approach I try to incorporate in my work, is how conducive it is to building relationships or connections with educators. And I think that is really the key variable. The U.S. Department of Education put out a position paper a few years ago, and in it said that one of the ways to decrease aggressive behavior in school, bullying, and so forth, is the presence of a staff member that a student can feel connected to. That for students to have relationship with at least one person in that building who is their go-to person. And I think that the strength-based approach, while it gives children confidence and enhances their skill set, it's also conducive to building those connections with other people as well. So I think you can't do one without the other. And that's why I enjoy it. I think, and it teaches that the feedback I've gotten from the book is that teachers feel that it's helped them to kind of rediscover like why they became teachers in the first place. So I think it's really something that looks at what the expectations of a teacher is. And if a teacher has certain expectations of a student, sometimes they become self-fulfilling prophecies. There was a study many years ago in New York City by a psychologist named Robert Rosenthal. And what he did was, I think it was a fifth grade or sixth grade elementary class. So at the beginning of the school year, he told the teachers, well, I assessed the children in their class. So I evaluated these children. I gave them my IQ test. And the following students are academic all-stars. We're going to be academic superstars. And he named these kids. And then what happened was his team was in the building and they would record the kids' progress, how the teacher interacted with the children. And what they found was that the students who he identified to the children, to the teachers in terms of their academic prowess, they were very successful academically. The teachers showed more patience to them, more encouragement. And also they had better peer relationships. They did not engage in bullying or have behavior issues. And they were very successful for the whole year. At the end of the year, Roosevelt then approaches the teachers and says, I have to come clean. I never tested anybody in your class. This was a study to show how teacher perception will influence your interaction with the kids. Now, I don't know what the teacher's reaction to this was. And he caught some flack for it because it was misleading his subjects. But it does show us that teacher expectations influence how the child can perform. And so if we try to help teachers understand that, they have the mindset that kids have assets, and even when they're taught to see, even when a child's having behavioral issues or academic issues, and I understand that's very challenging. And we're not saying ignore the challenges. We're not saying don't attend to that. But what we're saying is, instead of focusing solely on that, where can the hook be to connect with a child? How can you facilitate a connection with a child to help them feel more engaged? And I think the strength-based or positive psychology approach helps to do that, And it creates a culture in the classroom. And teachers can do this. Teachers can cultivate positive relationship with a child in so many ways. I remember there was a fifth grade teacher in my school. She was a big baseball fan. She was a big Mets fan. And as were a lot of kids in her class. And every day she would come in and she'd spend the first 5 minutes of the class during baseball season. Who watched the game last night? What do you think of that game? And they would have this little chat with them. And every day the Mets won. She wouldn't give homework the next day. So the kids were really buying into this. And it just facilitated this really warm, positive connection. The teacher figured out that what energizes these kids and what mobilizes them, she should use to her advantage. And the children, for their part, and I would see this, were really, pretty well behaved, and they really enjoyed being in her class overall. And they had a lot of fun, which is a good thing.
That's an incredible story. Now, some might assume that a strength based approach ignores student weaknesses or sugarcoats the challenges. How do you address that misconception?
Learning disabilities, children who struggle with other situations. In no way is that ignored or sugarcoated. They are real and they're very much part of who that child is. And you do need remediation efforts to address some of those challenges, of course. But I think if you just leave your efforts at remediating the challenges and not try to potentially tap into a whole nother dimension of a child, what they can bring to the table, what they do well, you're missing out. There's a story, I give you a story. There's a third grade girl in my school, and she was struggling. She'd get to school late every day, which didn't help because she didn't want to come to school, and she would fight with her parents about coming, fight with her mom. Then when she got to school, she was very disengaged. She would put her head down a lot. She wasn't buying into the lesson, and she just seemed really disinterested. And so I had a meeting with the teacher, and we talked about how can I and her collaborate to help this child feel part of the class community? What can we do? And there's different ways you could go. I mean, she was classified ADHD and she was on medication. I mean, one approach could have been, oh, let's look at her medicine. Another approach could have been, maybe we could do a behavior plan and reinforce. But I took a different approach with her. The both of us did, actually. And I said to her, what do you see the student doing well? There must be something. And she thought for a minute, the teacher, and she said, when the student's on task, which is not very often, she can be fairly organized and responsible. So we discussed about giving her a classroom job, something that would tap into that. So we came up with the idea of making her the attendance monitor. And every day she got a clipboard and she would have to come in and take attendance. And how she was approached, the teacher didn't say to her, you have to do this chore. She said, I could really use your help. I am really busy in the morning. I got to get the class ready. I have all this paperwork to do. If you could just walk around for like 5 minutes and just check off everybody's attendance that they're here, that'd be such a huge help to me. And I really think you could do a good job. So the teacher asked for her help. And the child was, I think, very impressed by, very happy about that, and readily took the invitation. So the teacher got her clipboard. And now that she's the attendance monitor, one reason that we did that is you take attendance first thing in the morning. So it motivated her to get to school on time. And she would walk around the room checking off, but we noticed something very interesting happen. Not only would she just do the attendance, but she would actually stop and very briefly interact with the children that she was taking the attendance of. And after she was finished taking the attendance, she wasn't putting her head down on her desk as much. She seemed more engaged. She would begin to participate more in the lesson at lunchtime instead of kind of sitting by herself, which is what she would do. Or the kids would reach out to her and she would accept, to play in games together and hang out together. And we noticed a significant change in her whole demeanor. Interestingly, the postscript of the story is that the mom was thrilled, but she approached me and said, we fight a lot at home and we disagree on a lot of stuff. Do you have any ideas? And I had heard about this strategy called the Good Behavior Book. And the Good Behavior Book is having the parent write down something that the child does well, big or small. Put the dishes away in the sink. She hung up her coat. She helped her sister with the homework, big or small. Just to kind of casually write down 1 or 2 sentences in a book, in a little notebook. At the end of the day, when the child was put to sleep, the mother would take out a good behavior book and said, "Hey, I saw you doing A, B, and C today, and that was so great." And they would talk about it was a jumping off point to talk about some of these things. And what we saw was that the child's and the mom's relationship got progressively better. And in school, she became a much stronger student. And I think what happened in those instances was by focusing on what we see and maybe not stopping to think about maybe a bigger picture, it's going to impact how we behave to the child, what our expectations are of the child, and what the child is going to give us as well. So I think for this girl in school went from an experience where she felt overwhelmed, disinterested, her weaknesses, she didn't feel valued. She didn't find it as a valuable experience. But when she was beginning to feel that she had something meaningful to contribute and was part of a community and using her ability to, you know, take the attendance accurately, I think that changed her mindset. And I guess in a way, it changed the mindset of the other children and the teacher because they began to see her in a light that they hadn't seen her in before. And so this is an example. Another story that comes to mind. There was a boy I was seeing. He was a seventh or eighth grader. He was in middle school and he was really not doing well in school behaviorally. He would refuse to go to school and he just was not achieving. And the mother one day was in to see me and we're talking about him. And she ends the session by saying, all he talks about, all he wants from me is a dog. He wants a dog. He wants a dog. All he talks about are dogs, dogs, dogs. So I said, well, is he interested in animals? And the mom says he is. I go, well, wait a minute. I said, that's it. That's maybe a hook we could think about using. So we reached out to the school. I called the guidance counselor who I knew. And I said, does your school happen to have like class pets? And teacher says, we do. And I said, well, this boy, and we both knew how difficult he was finding school. This boy, I think, if he had some animals to take care of, he had some responsibility at school, I wonder if it would make a difference for him. Well, the guidance counselor loved the idea. The mother was on board. So the principal calls him in and says, you're the school's pet monitor. Every day, we like you to come in a little before school, go to the classrooms, make sure the animals are okay, maybe in some cases feed them. And again, she came in motivated and he loved taking care of these animals every day. And as a matter of fact, he was so into it. The guidance counselor had an idea that why don't we help him? Maybe we could exploit this even further in a positive way, have him walk around and give little group lectures to kids on how to take care of pets, how to take care of animals, which he did. So it was a major turnaround for him. He really felt more connected to the school. He felt he put something of value to it. And again, he had fun. And it changed his mindset of what the school should be like. And it changed the mindset of how the people in the school viewed him. And all by tapping into, and this was like a throwaway comment that the mom made, but his interest in wanting a dog, it showed me that some part of him, a big part of him was yearning for a connection, yearning for something, like you give him affection and love. And so we decided to channel that, maybe transfer that to what could the school offer? How could the school try to meet that need? And he was very good at his job. And eventually he did get a dog and he took very good care of it. So there you go.
Those two stories beautifully illustrate how teacher-student relationships can really be a tipping point between engagement and alienation. I mean, your model just really strengthens that connection. If only we could make those connections with all of our students.
They've done research on resiliency in children and big topic. And one of the things they did, they interviewed adults who had very challenging childhoods, who really, had struggles before them. And one of the questions they would ask these adults, and these kids grew into adults when they were interviewed, who became somewhat successful, in their career and they had good relationships. but they really grew up in very challenging times for themselves and their families. And so the number one question the researchers would ask is, how did you get through it? Like, what was there that allowed you to develop? And the number one answer these kids gave was that there was a caring adult. There was somebody who believed in me, whether it's a coach, a teacher. Very often it is a coach or a teacher. Could be a parent too, but sometimes that doesn't always work out. But there was somebody who wanted me, who was genuinely interested in me. There was a psychologist years ago named Dr. Jules Siegel. And Dr. Jules Siegel put out the concept of a charismatic adult. A charismatic adult is not somebody that has a very outgoing and flamboyant personality. A charismatic adult is somebody from whom a child can gather strength from. Usually it's a teacher or a parent, and that, you mentioned tipping point, and that is the tipping point, I think, between engagement and alienation for a lot of children in school. And they've done research to show that the stronger the relationship a child has with a teacher, they report it helps kids across all socioeconomic levels be more committed to school, to be more academically successful to the extent that they can, more receptive to what school is. And I think that the strength-based model, by pointing out, holding up a mirror to a child and saying, look at these strengths you have, look at, we're going to try to figure out what these are. I mean, you're the one holding up the mirror, you're the one giving the message. It's not only going to help the child discover what they can do well, but it's also going to help the child feel better about you and feel more connected to you. So I think it goes hand in hand. And again, we're not ignoring challenging aspects of a child. The psychologist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Robert Brooks, whose conference I went to, who got me really excited about this approach, he points out that one of the things an educator can do is to help children feel better about themselves. So suggest this exercise for teachers, which I really think is terrific. So on the first day of school, when a teacher is getting to know the class, one of the first things a teacher should say after they get to know the kids somewhat is, who here is afraid of making a mistake? And the very first hand that goes up should be the teacher's. And then the teacher can then give an example, an appropriate example of a mistake that they made, and how that worked out. And so then the teacher can then take it a step further and say, who here in this class has ever made a mistake? So now that the teacher has sort of opened that up, hopefully then you get some children who will share. Then you take it a step further and say to the kids, well, it's going to happen. We're all going to make mistakes. So how can we support each other if we make a mistake in this class? And I think that's a very potent lesson for a child. And that is a strength-based approach in a sense. It's not a particular strength, but it's helping a child be a little more open to taking a risk, to putting themselves out there. And that's a very important life lesson. We learn from our mistakes. Trial and error learning is a very effective way of learning. And we're not all going to hit home runs all the time. Speaking of home runs, there was a very famous baseball player years ago, Willie Stargell, and he was on the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Willie Stargell was a tremendous hitter, but he also struck out a lot. And I remember watching an interview with him, and the interviewer says, you're this great hitter, you get all these hits, singles, home runs, but you strike out a lot. Like, how do you reconcile that? So Willie Stargell's philosophy was, well, those strikeouts make me the hitter that I am. Every time I strike out, I learn something, how to hold the bat, how to track the ball, something about the way the pitcher throws the ball, something about my swing. So I try to take every strikeout and use it as an opportunity to learn and get better. And I think that's a very important lesson to teach kids, the fear of making a mistake, which I think is a fear that a lot of us have and a lot of children have too. This psychologist named Dr. Carol Dweck has identified two mindsets in kids, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset, you look at yourself as, well, my talents and my smarts will get me through it. And the problem with that is if their talents and smarts can't get them through it, it's a real wound to their self-esteem. They don't want to do the task, and they avoid because the risk of making a mistake is just such a blow to their self-image. Whereas with growth mindset, rather, The thinking there for kids is I want to do the best I can, but if I make a mistake, my skill and talent is just a starting point. Experience is where I'm really going to get better at. And so if I mess up, it will help me. I'll get something from that messing up. I will learn something from it. And and she's done experiments, research in schools with children. And, it's interesting. And in one famous study, she gave random kids a very difficult puzzle to solve. And so for one group, it was an easy puzzle. One group of kids were just told, "You're really smart." That's the only feedback they got. The other group of kids, "You tried really hard." That's the only feedback they got. What she found, her and the team, was that as the puzzles got more difficult, the kids who were told how smart they didn't want to do the puzzles because the risk of making a mistake was such a blow to their image of themselves. Whereas the kids who said you try hard, effort is something you can control. So if the effort isn't there, you can always try to work at making it better. So if the kids were told you gave a really good effort, you tried hard, they were more than willing to tackle the more difficult. They were said, "Here's a difficult problem." And the kids who got the feedback was how smart you are. They weren't so keen on doing it and they avoided it. And the kids who were told, their effort really, they tried so hard, they were more than willing to try it because it was all an opportunity to learn and get better. And the effort was what was being emphasized, not the outcome. And that's something I try to talk to parents about. I talk about it in the book that if we emphasize the outcome, we're losing the process possibly along the way. And if the outcome isn't going to be exactly what we want or what they want, they won't necessarily try it. But the effort is something they can always bring to the table.
So I'm hearing two things. As teachers, we need to work on growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And, this shift is really important to embracing our strength-based teaching. Am I right?
Absolutely. That's one of the things I do talk about in the book, how teachers can instill a growth mindset for children in the classroom. A lot of it's by the comments they make. There was one teacher I worked with who, a lot of teachers, when they grade tests, would sometimes, put a big X on the things the kids got wrong. Other teachers, they did it a little differently. They put a big check mark in front of all the things they got right. So the kids would look out and it would use the mistakes to learn from, but the emphasis was on, okay, what they did right, what we can build on, what we can do better. This vignette comes to mind about how this fear of mistakes can really paralyze kids. I remember going to my son's Little League game, and there was a child about 9 or 10 years old. He comes up to bat, and it's the end of the game, and his team is losing, and bases are loaded, and there's 2 out, and he's struck out. So what does he do? He throws the bat to the ground, he yells at the umpire, he takes his helmet, he brings it into the dugout, and he just goes to the dugout and he is having an absolute meltdown. I felt horrible for this boy, and his parents were mortified. And he was obviously putting all this pressure on himself. He wanted that outcome. And I couldn't help but wonder, is this how he tolerates mistakes? Is this how he tolerates when he doesn't live up to his expectations? And if it's either all or nothing. In contrast to that, there was a boy I was seeing, an 8th grader, who had learning difficulties. And he was taking a science test. And we talked about this a couple of times because he was worried about it. It was a hard test. He studied, he took the test. He didn't feel so great about it afterwards. He wound up failing. But what did he do? He made an appointment to see the teacher, not to protest that it was an unfair grade, not to say at the teacher, you got to regrade the test. He went to the teacher and he said, "What did I do wrong here? I want to see what questions I got wrong. I want to figure it out so I'll understand for the next time." And so those are 2 very different ways to deal with setbacks. Do we let the outcome of the setback dictate how we're going to behave and how we're going to manage ourselves? Or are we going to take the outcome of the setback and see, okay, well, what can I put into it to get better at? What can I put into it to improve? And the second child, 2 vastly different approaches. The second child really wanted to learn from his mistakes and setbacks. The first child was angry at himself for committing them. And where do you go with that afterwards? It's very difficult.
I just kind of want to highlight for our listeners, you talk about two really key strategies with growth mindset. And what I love is starting out the semester, starting out that day with the kids of raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake or if you have a fear of making a mistake. That just automatically sets growth mindset. And then the other is the check mark versus the X. I'd never really thought about that, but it does instantly change from a positive to a negative. And so I just wanted to highlight those two strategies that you've mentioned with us today. Do you have any others just for something that we could
Oh,
change today?
it's interesting. The messages we tell ourselves, the thoughts that we have will dictate how we behave, how we respond, how we deal with different situations. Yeah, there's one story I was thinking. So in this story, I helped a child take what was a challenging behavior and made it a super strength. So a boy that I was seeing, and he unfortunately was distractible at times, very distractible. And also he had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That when he was distractible, he would focus on everything that was distractible and just devote all his attention to it. And the problem was for him, he played soccer when he was a goalie. And so he's looking at the kids in the stands, he's looking at the clouds in the sky, and he's following them intently. And he's missing the ball. So he was talking about it one day in a session. He was really upset because the coach was saying, if you don't change, we're going to have to pull you as the goalie because you're hurting the team. And so I said to him, it seems to me that you're very good at staring at the people in the stands, looking at the clouds in the sky. You put a lot of energy into it. I think what you could do is take that energy and just put it on the ball. Just vigilantly stare at the ball and just see where the ball is. So all that energy and all that time that you spend looking elsewhere, just remind yourself, look at the ball, look at the ball, look at the ball, and just focus, because you're very focused when you look at other things. So we want you to be focused on the things you need to be focused on. So he tried that. He went to a few games that were left in the season, and he tried that. And he would remind himself, I'm just going to look at the ball because I'm really good at looking at the balls. I'm good at looking at things and focusing on things. And just for him, unfortunately, he was focusing on things that weren't helpful to him. And he became a much more effective goalie. So there we took what you could look at. Oh, he's distracted. He's, not concentrating. He was concentrating. He was just concentrating on what he was choosing to concentrate on. So we just wanted to bring to his attention that he could harness that ability and use it to help himself. And he became a much better goalie. And also then there was, collateral effects of that. The kids were very happy with him. He felt redeemed. His parents were happy. So, all of that good stuff happened as well. But it all started with him. He could have looked at himself and said, oh, I'm so distracted. What's wrong with me? But he used that challenge. He tried to flip it around on how he looked at it as a strength. And it was a strength for him.
And we've already alluded to this a bit, but as you were mentioning, teachers work with students in varying abilities, backgrounds, learning styles. How can they implement the strength based strategies in a way that benefits all students, not just those who are already thriving?
Well, one of the positives, one of the nice things about a strength-based approach is that it can be useful for children across a wide range. There really are no barriers, socioeconomic level, academic level, levels of achievement. It really can be applied effectively with children across many different dimensions. Part of what it is too, it's a mindset that we're trying to help children create for themselves, that to help them see that there are these buried treasures, so to speak, inside of them. And sometimes I think kids that struggle in school, they don't have that experience. And as a result, they don't see themselves, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't see themselves as being able to be successful. So I think helping children identify their strengths, there are fun things teachers can do in the classroom One of the things I tell teachers to do is and kids could do this either individually or do it as a whole class. I have the teachers say to draw, or have the children draw an outline of a mountain, just the outline. And in the mountain, put one thing that you're good at. If the kid can't think of anything they're good at, maybe the teacher can give them some suggestions or help. And every day or every other day or a few times a week, each child fills in their mountain of strengths from the bottom to the top. And then when they fill in the mountain, everybody celebrates their strengths. They talk about it. Maybe we have a pizza party once in a while for the kids. And those strengths can be put on the wall and everybody can see what they do well, what's real and what's concrete. And I think especially with younger kids, I think it's a good way for them to see the things they can do well, which they don't necessarily, there's not always that emphasis on it, but I think it's a start. And there's other things too. I've had other kids do these strength chains where you write down different things that you well at academically, socially, let's say, particular skills you have, like math, reading skills, whatever strengths you have in a variety of areas for socially, physically, academically, so forth. And you could do show and tell with the young kids too, show and tell of strength. Bring in something, talk about something that you did well. So it could be a story, it could be a thing they did, a thing they made. One of the things I do with kids is to suggest they do like a strengths scavenger hunt. So I give them like a sheet of paper, but find something that you feel proud of. They're in the book, 15 or 20 of them. And then the children then talk about it. Okay, so tell me about that. What was the story with that? What did you do? What was it like? What did it feel like? One of the things also you could do is have children develop an award. You get a template of an award online, or they could draw an award and they could give themselves an award for something. A group exercise is getting a group of 5 or 6 kids and handing out index cards to each child with the name of a student on the front and in the group. And each child writes for 1 minute things that the other kid does well, or things that they like about the other kid. And after 60 seconds, the card goes to the next one and the next one. You all fill out your own card. And then the teacher collects the card, and then we get a spokesman. And the spokesman says, okay, well, for Ralph, this is what people really, feel Ralph does very well, like about Ralph, A, B, C, D, and E. And it's a very fun way to have kids tap into what they can do. A lot of us may not know what we can do well. Maybe other people see things about us that maybe we don't recognize. So again, it's a powerful way, I think, some of these ideas to establish a mindset. We begin to see ourselves as can do rather than can't do. And I think if you have that kind of mindset, I think then maybe you can feel like you could tackle some of the areas that need tackling, that need building up, that need improving. And you start from that. So, and again, the relationship the teacher has with the kid, it's part and parcel of this. If you're a teacher who's facilitating this in the classroom and helping kids discover their amazing buried treasures, their amazing strengths, that's something that's going to resonate with them for a long time. And I tell parents a story. It's a kind of an apocryphal story, but from what I've done some research, and it seems that it did happen. When they were looking for the tomb of King Tut 100 years ago in the Middle East, they found this area and they had to dig and dig, and they found an entranceway to a room. And the archaeologist on the expedition looked in the room, and his associate said, "What do you see in there?" And he says, "Things that are beyond belief." And that story kind of is a metaphor in a way. All these valuables, this gold and jewels and all these wonderful things that were underground, nobody knew they existed. You had to dig. You had to get to it. And when they made the effort to dig and get to it, it wasn't always easy, but when they got there, there was these just amazing artifacts that they discovered, which they eventually brought back to Britain and they put them, in a museum. When I see kids for a session, most of them probably know why they're seeing me in the first place. They've had issues, but I'll ask a kid, and I just don't want to know what the problem is. I'll say, "What do you do well?" Sometimes they tell me, and sometimes that information is useful in my work with them. And sometimes I don't know. Nothing. I'll say, well, everybody does something well, and that's going to be one of our jobs. We're going to try to figure out some things that you do well, because I think it's important that you know that about yourself. So again, the strength-based approach is really helping people to look at themselves in ways that, maybe they hadn't. And, in the medical model, which has been very helpful in medicine, we look at what the symptoms, what the pathology is, and we develop treatments for that. And that way of thinking was brought to mental health. Sigmund Freud, who developed what he called the talking cure, or which is psychotherapy, in his writings, he wrote about symptoms and underlying conflicts and things like that. There really wasn't an emphasis on what people did well. And it was years later that mental health people began to wonder, well, is there another side to this coin, as I said, that we can look at? And I think the turning point was in 1988 at a conference of the American Psychological Association. The president, a fellow named Martin Seligman, who's still very active, he said that psychologists, are very great at identifying pathology and illness and treating it, but we're missing out on what makes people resilient, what makes people able to become the best versions of themselves. And that really started a movement. This whole positive psychology movement came from that. And even if you look in the business world, the corporations try to enhance employee engagement, employee wellness, by looking at how can we bring out the best in the people that we have working for us. Of course, they want to improve the bottom line, but along the same line, what they're finding is that, and there's a lot of research that show that happier, more content employees are more productive. And so everybody wins, something like that. So then this approach of not what's wrong, but what's right began to be applied beyond the mental health consultation room. It was brought to the business world. It was brought to education. And since then, it's really mushroomed into a very big thing. And now we're much more attuned, which is a good thing, I think.
Excellent. Very well said. So for
Yeah.
schools and districts looking to adopt a strength-based approach in a larger scale, where should they start? What are some of the biggest challenges in shifting school culture, and how can they be overcome? I'm sorry, I know that was 3 questions in one.
No, I think it's actually something I talk about in my book. I talk about doing it in the classroom, but how to work at enhancing and developing a strength-based culture, building wide, district wide. Well, first, I think there has to be an openness to looking at kids from this perspective, and how can you facilitate that? I think that a couple of thoughts. One, that there has to be a commitment to training for teachers to be able to really become indoctrinated into what is this whole positive psychology approach? What is the research behind it? Is it just giving platitudes to kids? And, it's not that at all. So it's really, they need training and understanding in terms of what they can do, how effective they can be in being this instrument of change for a lot of children is number one. I also think in teacher training programs, okay, I would start there. I think it would be very helpful if they had an understanding of these ideas, even before they set foot in the classroom. It's and there might be people who would say, well, this is all well and good, but I have to teach to curriculum. I have to make sure I cover this math and the social studies and these state tests in some places, and the kids have to take the state test. That's true. They do have to cover the curriculum, but I don't think it has to be an either or type of thing. I think that by enhancing, children in this way, it will make the other part of it, the curriculum part of it, go easier and go smoother. I think if we're able to have kids learn about themselves and the things they can do well, it will enhance their ability to master it. It'll make it easier for the teacher, I think, to teach, and they'll be more effective. And there's a lot of research that shows that kids do better in the classroom academically when they have this perspective. The example I gave before of Dr. Rosenthal, who the teachers believed that these kids were academic superstars, and the kids performed at a much better level than all the other kids in the class, even though they were never assessed. It may have been, maybe they were all academic superstars, but the thing is, the teacher's mindset, the teacher's attitude, I think was a very key variable. And so I think if teachers were able to approach, and they had the tools and they had the understanding to approach their children with this perspective, I think it would make for, a more effective culture in the classroom, and they would get their work done, and they would be more engaged, the kids. And the teachers, I think, would be much more engaged. I've been in enough teacher rooms to hear teachers bemoaning some of the situations they have to deal with and complaining about. And they're not easy. They're not easy. But I think, like, where do you go with that, though? And I think it generates a sense of hopelessness, a sense of despair. And I think if you're feeling that as a teacher, there's a very good sense that the kids are going to be feeling that as well about themselves. I think that would be a very important first step in changing a culture. And also involving the parents too. I talk about that, involving the parents and getting them to see that they can also be part of this. Parents could also be very effective in helping identify strengths of their kids and bringing out the best in the children. So maybe there could be somewhat of a collaboration too.
Dr. Barron, this has been just one of my favorite conversations. What is one key takeaway that you hope for teachers, parents, and administrators that they can take away from today's episode?
One takeaway, I could think of several. If I was to say one takeaway, it would be that I think that children want to be the best versions of themselves. Children want to feel successful, even when they push us away, even when they're really down on themselves. It comes from a place of frustration. It comes from a place of hurt. I think that deep down, and the reason they may feel that way is that maybe they've tried and they haven't experienced the success that they want. And I think if we can help children understand that they can see themselves as having value, and the teacher validates that in the classroom, and little by little, I think that would be the most important thing. One more takeaway for the teachers would be that you are the key, I think, to a very large extent. You are like the weather person in the classroom. You can make the climate gloomy and dark, or you can make it sunshiny and warm. And I think how you set the climate in your classroom will go a very long way in determining whether it's going to be sunny or stormy.
Excellent metaphor. Dr. Barron, where can people connect with you?
Well, my website, Dr. Stephen, STEVEN drstephenbarron.com. On my website, there is a link about my book and to learn about it. And it's published by Routledge. And also there's a way to send me an email to contact me. And if people have interesting strength-based stories that they want to share, I would love to hear it.
I just want to thank you again for being here today and sharing all of your incredible wisdom with us.
Riley, it was my pleasure. I am so grateful to you to offer me this forum. I love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate you giving me the forum to do so. And if anybody was impacted in any way, even just a little bit, that would be well worth it to do. If at least one teacher can say, well, maybe I will try that or do something a little differently. I think that as long as they hear the message and they want to act on it, that's great. That makes me happy.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Innovating Education. We're proud to be supported by Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like this possible. If you found this discussion valuable, please share it with your fellow educators, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights on transforming education. For listeners who want to learn more, be sure to check out Dr. Barron's book, Teaching a Strength-Based Approach: How to Motivate Students and Build Relationships. Until next time, keep inspiring and keep innovating.